meeting, and we're going to start with an invocation. So if you bow your heads with me. Yeah, it's on.
Jim, we can't hear you.
There you go. Test?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I can hear you, Henry, thanks.
Dear God, thank you for our beautiful city and county we all live in. Be with the people of the world that have been stressed out by war and tornadoes and their lives devastated. And guide us today as we make decisions for the city and county. Thank you. Amen. Okay. Can we have a motion for approval of the April meeting minutes? Can we have approval of the April meeting minutes? Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor, raise your
Aye.
hand. Thank you. Motion carries.
The financial report, we'll do this briefly. If you turn to the very first page of the financial statement, go about halfway down where it says total commission revenue. And through April of this year, our total commission revenue has been $143,257, which is about 74% of what our budgeted amount was for the first, whatever that is, 10 months of the year. So we're about $18,000 short of what our budget amount is, and almost all of that is review fees. And so we're just, behind where we thought we would be on review fees. And if you turn the page, next page, to almost all the way down where it says total commission expenses, you'll see our total expenditures for the year have been $149,542, which is about 63% of what we have budgeted. And again, if we were on a normal pace, it'd be at 83%. So we're actually about $46,000 below budget on expenditures. So we're $18,000 below budget on revenue, but $46,000 below in expenditures. And a lot of the expenditure, favorableness is due to, again, to the county picking up our health and dental insurance this year. So that's a very quick summary of our financial situation.
Thank you.
We do need a motion.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the financial statement?
I'll move to approve the financial
Do
statement.
we have
I
a second? Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Michaela, you wanted to start with Shelby Green on the, well, I guess we have a
Construction sureties,
so-
yep. Do you want me to read through those?
Yeah.
Okay. The first is Stonegate Developers LLC. Sorry, we have a slightly different number than what I had on the agenda. That was due to the 10% project contingency that we require not being in the line items there. So they are asking us to accept the initial letter of credit, an amount of $275,829. They're choosing to do the 20% bonding option, so that means they'll complete the project prior to recording the subdivision plat, and also to authorize the chairman to sign the developer construction contract. These numbers have been reviewed by the utilities and by the county road department, and they both signed off on it.
Do we have a motion to accept their request to do this
I'll
then?
make the motion.
Okay, we have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, raise your
Aye.
hand.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. You want to do Highcliff Properties?
Yep, High Cliff Properties LLC, Brooks Acres. This is to accept the initial letter of credit in amount of $863,516 from construction bond estimate and authorized chairman to sign developer construction contract. They are choosing to do the 100% bonding option. This, again, has been reviewed by utilities and the city engineer, and they both signed off on the amount.
Okay. Do we have a motion to accept that as a construction surety?
I move we accept the construction security on Highcliff property.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. All in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries. Moving on to subdivision approvals. You want to tell us about Shelby Green, Michaela?
Yep, Shelby Green Limited has applied for the subdivision of an 11.113 acre parcel of land located at 0 Breathitt Ave, Junction City. The property is zoned R1A. So this is Phase 2, Section 3 of Shelby Green subdivision. They're proposing 32 residential lots on this. As part of our tech review, we had some conversations about changes that need to be made to the plat that was originally submitted. One was the hammerhead here. They were showing a temporary cul-de-sac. They actually need to show a permanent hammerhead until such time as this property is developed, if it ever is. And then we asked for 2 stub streets on the southern portion of this, one down here for this 17 acres and one for this 36 acres. After further discussion with the applicant, we actually realized, that this property to the south here, it's actually an event and sports venue. It's a developed property, this 17 acres here. It's a developed commercial use. Our subreg states that it needs to be an undeveloped tract of land. It's supposed to be a compatible use. I don't view this as being compatible. It's also a developed property. So we're really just looking at that one connection. If we put in a stub street here, this would still hopefully provide future connection to the school and to the Junction City Park there without having to get on Houstonville Road here. So they have submitted an updated plat with this stub street shown here to that 36 acres and with the hammerhead as discussed. So I do feel that this plat is meeting all of our requirements per the subregs and zoning ordinance. Are there any questions for me on that?
Do we have a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve.
A second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Thank you. You want to continue with Christopher Bernstein?
Yep. Oops. All right, Christopher Bernstern has applied for the subdivision of a 72.001 acre parcel of land located at 0 Elk Cave Road, Boyle County. The property is zoned ag. Sorry, this is a little hard to see, but they are showing the 6 tracks. The big comment on this one was in regards to tract 6. It's a smaller non-conforming lot on the other side of Elk Cave Road there. I asked that they show some combination lines to this tract here. So I think, Dale, I haven't seen it submitted, but I'm assuming that's what the intent is.
Right, yes, that the original property went across the Elk Cave Road to the creek there. And so they're just gonna create that little tract to combine it with the adjoiner to the south, which is, his last name is Taylor.
Yep, and I think we needed to show floodplain on it.
Yes, we've got the floodplain on it now.
Okay,
Which basically takes in all of the, along the creek there, down along the road, and just a little bit into the 5 tracks that's on the north side of the road. Actually, the floodplain follows pretty close to the the setback line. And that'll definitely be on the plat for the signatures.
yep. Yeah, otherwise, I think there's sufficient space on all the tracks that they're creating to build despite the floodplain, and this plat is meeting all of our requirements with the noted changes that are needed.
Henry, do you have something to say?
No, Mr. Chairman.
No,
And,
No,
and
okay.
sorry,
is-
if it's hard to hear him, I'll try and relay what he's saying.
there is existing housing on track 2, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's the only one that's there?
Yes, yes.
Do we have a motion, do we have any more discussion about it? Do we have a motion to approve? Okay, thank you. Do you have a second to the motion?
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, now we'll leave the regular meeting and move to the public hearing. And the Patel property at Skywatch Hospitality wishes to table their motion.
Yes, I believe we tabled this indefinitely until they're ready to bring it back off the table, so I don't believe we require any motion or any action on this. We'll hear it. I believe we'll be hearing it at the next meeting, but.
Okay.
The second public hearing that we have today is on the solar regulations. And you
Yep.
provided copies of the proposed regulations?
Yes.
Okay.
The Danville-Boyle County, this was tabled from April 24th, so I actually believe we need to have a motion to take it off the table. Is that right, Henry?
That's right.
Yes.
Okay, so do we have a motion to take it off the table?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we take off the table the item concerning merchant electric generating facilities from the joint zoning ordinance that was tabled on April 24th.
Do we have a second to that motion?
I
Thank
second.
you. All in favor? All right, motion carries.
Okay.
Now,
I just want to note that I did re-advertise for this. I had only advertised for Article 5 previously, so I did re-advertise to include Article 4 in our newspaper advertisement. So the Danville-Boyle County Planning and Zoning Commission has filed an application to amend the regulations relating to merchant electric generating facilities and Articles 4 and 5 of the joint zoning ordinance. We did discuss this at the previous meeting. The major changes or comments that we had were in regards to setback requirements in KRS. I did review that, the state statute more closely, because there was talks about 2,000-foot setbacks. But the way that KRS 278.7043A reads is that we do have primacy over the decommissioning requirements in KRS 278.7062M and the setback requirements in subsections 2 and 5 of this section. So basically, the state statute is giving us the authority to, create whatever setbacks we feel are appropriate for merchant electric generating facilities. What we had discussed previously was 500 feet, so that's how I kept it. If we hadn't set those, I think 2,000 foot would be what was applicable per state statute. Is there any questions or comments on that? No? All right. The next item that we discussed were wind turbine setbacks. We had talked about maybe making it the height of a wind turbine plus 50%. I actually did some research since we last met, and it seems that the average height of a wind turbine is 300 feet, with the tallest being at 400 feet. So I do feel that our 500-foot setbacks are appropriate, and it will allow for wind turbines to go in without any safety concerns. If for some reason we ever got into a situation where wind turbines start being built bigger than what they currently are, we can revisit this requirement. But right now, I do feel comfortable with the 500 feet. But if anyone has any questions or concerns about that, we can. Any comments on that? Okay. And then finally, we had talked about basically adding some language in for, to address the sewer requirement in Article 4. So that's what I've got up on the screen here. This is what Henry worked on. He gave us two options. So he basically put an asterisk next to each of the industrial zoning districts here. So right now it says not applicable for septic systems, so I'd read that as anything in the industrial zoning district has to be on sewer. So Henry added the asterisks and then two options. Option 1, in the case of merchant electric generating facilities where no plumbing is installed, public sewer shall not be required, and the lot area minimums for parcels on public sewer shall apply. along with all other development standards set out above. The exception from the sewer requirement shall not apply to other uses in the industrial and mixed-use districts. Option 2, in the case of any land use where no plumbing is installed, public sewer shall not be required, and the lot area minimums for parcels on public sewer shall apply, along with all other development standards set out above. So basically, the difference between the two options, to try and make it as simple as possible, option 1 is basically giving you an exception just for merchant electric generating facilities. Option 2 is giving an exception for any type of proposed industrial use that would not require public sewer. So, maybe some storage facilities or, things like that. So it makes it a little bit more broad. I did want to just mention the fact that we have not created an exception for any of our other zoning districts currently right now. All of our zoning districts, aside from ag and rural residential, are required to be on sewer in the county. So this would be a unique thing that we're doing. So it is just something to consider, that we haven't created this exception in any other circumstances, even for residential use, things like that in the county. Are there any questions on that?
Well, if we haven't created an exception for anyone else, then I wouldn't be in favor of option 2, which is a more general one. Limit to commercial electric facility.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes more sense to keep it at a very general, it keeps it at a very general level, since there's no other existing language.
Yep.
Planning and zoning brings us to the public hearing as a request that we accept the regulations as they're proposed here. And it's a public hearing, so does anybody wish to speak in opposition to the thing, or just speak in general? Mark, you want to come up to the podium and identify yourself?
It's good to see everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. There are a couple of things that I'm here working with Smart Growth Boyle and as a private citizen. My name is Mark Morgan. My wife Joni and I have lived here since 1981, and we've lived in the Forkland area as well as off of Bluegrass Pike. I've worked extensively with farmland prior to being here, and since being here, worked with the Wildlife Refuge and a lot of other areas out in the county. We have an incredible amount of prime farmland for a small county. The resource we have is sustaining. Out on Bluegrass Pike, I see trucks going by with corn and other things for our bourbon industry, which is a huge income generator for our community. And that prime farmland, once it's destroyed, is lost forever. The proposed ordinance is going to alter prime farmland from ag to industrial. I don't think it would ever go back, and what we'd be doing, the way this ordinance is written, is we'd be spot zoning. We've worked real hard on the John Hill Bailey Industrial Park to develop it in a rational way and to cluster and to maintain the industrial character and supporting infrastructure of that facility and others that are adjacent to it. And our county benefits greatly from that. Conversely, if we start allowing ag land to be spot zoned as industrial, the solar farms under today's technology have a useful life of I've heard ranges from 20 to 30 years, which sounds like a long time, but in terms of the prime farmland resource, that's not a long time. And there's also a long history in the solar industry. There's a new technology of undercapitalization on the front end and speculation, so that P and Z would be spot zoning ag land, prime farmland as industrial, and then we have an undercapitalized technology, and then we have an industrial spot with no supporting infrastructure, and it changes the whole character. I know that the semis going up and down Bluegrass Pike, as we've gotten more ag going for the bourbon industry, is changing the character of that area. So this is something we should be very slow about changing from ag to industrial to accommodate this use. In addition, when a matter comes for P&Z, it can come before yourselves as the commission, where you focus intently upon whether it's consistent with the comp plan and the future land use map, the current land use map, current ordinances, et cetera. When a new developing technology is, or land use is being considered, such as we had with the wedding barns, then our Board of Adjustments and the conditional use permitting process is really tailor-made for that situation, where an administrative tribunal can be held, testimony can be taken, experts in that developing technology field can be heard, a record can be made, and there can be rational judicial review. You all work very hard, and you do an excellent job of taking care of matters that are contemplated by our comp plan and by our future land use map and our current land use map. But I know I was present during the wedding barn development. And one wedding barn the concerns were it was going to be loud late at night. The other wedding barn, the concerns were increased traffic and parking on a rural, narrow, one-lane road, et cetera, et cetera. Solar farms are the same sort of technology. If you try to keep up with this, you're going to have to keep current every day or every week, because there are weekly developments. There's current research being done on the spacing between the solar panels as to whether there can actually be grazing and farming and saving some of the biota of the prime farmland, as conversely putting the solar panels adjacent to each other, and whether that's going to destroy the prime farmland, et cetera. So when we have a situation like this, where new best practices are being developed and research is being published on a continuing basis, I think it makes great sense to develop the record and send this before the Board of Adjustments for a conditional use permit that can be tailor-made to that particular project, as opposed to treating it as a routine planning and zoning matter. So I hope that you all will see that this should be a CUP type of matter instead of a routine planning and zoning commission matter. So I don't know if you have any questions. There's more things that I think are relevant, but the two main problems that I see with the ordinance as it is that we've got to consider whether we're going to use the Board of Adjustments, and we've got to avoid spot zoning. We've been, the setbacks, Mikhail has done an excellent job of explaining what the requirements are and how those are rational. Bonding, we've got to have bonding sufficient to remove the road, and at the end of the life of a project, we've got to have bonding sufficient to remove the infrastructure that's in place, and that's pretty expensive. We've seen our fiscal court have to dip into their funds to do things that were under bonded when developers didn't meet their curbing and guttering and road requirements in the past. We don't want a huge bill for the next generation on removal of one of these. So I'm all for solar, and I'm all for alternative energy, and I think we need it as a nation, but I think we need to protect our prime farmland also. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
In considering the industrial zoning, when we talked about it, we realized that these merchant electric generating facilities have to have a transmission line very close to them. So I'm not sure in the sense that you have a zoning map of Flume with wide areas dedicated to this or that, but you can do that when you're looking at pretty much spot areas of the county that would be even acceptable at all to a solar company. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but I'm saying how would you propose to deal with that?
I would hope that you all would design the ordinance so that it went before the conditional use permit, and each project would have conditions for its use that would be tailor-made to address those particular issues. And the Board of Adjustments has the flexibility that the Planning and Zoning Commission lacks in terms of ability to creatively, based on best practices and reasonable testimony and reasonable information, to design a project so that it can have conditions that are consistent with that project and meets the goals of planning and zoning, but isn't tied as tightly by planning and zoning. I don't know if that's a great answer to your question, because I'm not sure there is one. It's a good question. But that's my best thoughts on it. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So I appreciate your speaking here this morning.
Thank you.
You're right, 30 years isn't a long time. I look now and I'm about to retire, so that happened so quickly. But as a hunter and a conservationist, I too am concerned about where this could head in the future. Could you talk to me briefly about what it would be like at the end of 30 years? These sites, would they be, and for lack of a better term, like a Superfund site? Like, what's it like getting the concrete out and the transmission line and things of that nature? What happens to the property?
I am not going to represent myself as expert qualified to answer that question. It's a great question. I can tell you that from the research I've read by more qualified individuals, the proximity and the angle of the panels makes a huge difference as to whether the soil, the microbes in the soil, the fertility of the soil is sustained or not, whether ruminants can actually graze around the panels or not, and if they do graze, then they're going to naturally fertilize some of it. Now, to your question, there's going to be a need for construction sites, and anytime you do construction, you're going to be storing equipment and storing materials on site, and the cleanup from a adjacent construction site is going to be very real for this. You're right, there is going to be a lot of concrete, a lot of piping. The people would prefer, the companies that are profitably doing this technology would prefer to leave everything in place. Obviously, we're not going to allow that in our county. So we're going to bond, I hope, have a bond that will remove it. Whether the bond will be sufficient, that's speculative. I know in surface coal mining, we've certainly seen a long history in Kentucky with underbonded surface coal mine operations throughout Appalachia. There will be some, it's my understanding, there will be some not Superfund type sites, but there will be a lot of hard infrastructure to remove. And it's concerning, but we need to embrace this technology somehow, somewhere. But I'd like to see it, if it's done here, I'd like to see it done where qualified people advise our Board of Adjustments how to do it, and we have conditional use permits, especially on the front end. If these become routine, we'll build a body of knowledge on how to deal with them. But for the next 5 years, I think until we're doing a new comp plan this year, and then 5 years later, hopefully, but it may be that in 5 years we gain knowledge and we can switch from a conditional use permit to a more routine planning and zoning commission process. But on the front end, I think we're ill-advised to not avail ourselves of the opportunity to get the best information available and utilize it in setting conditions on this use.
I've got to step out for a couple minutes
Yeah.
and cancel a
No,
10:30 meeting,
wait.
so I can continue with, I can go cancel and then we can continue, but I've got to step out and cancel my.
Are you sure? Because we
Yeah.
can just table this
No,
till
we don't-
next
I don't-
month.
If they want to continue, I just need 2 minutes to cancel a meeting.
Okay.
Still continue discussion
Okay,
while
Terry.
he's out or not?
No, we'll pause for a minute. Sorry.
Shall we continue?
Yep.
You have any more to add?
I'd be repeating myself, and I don't want to waste your time.
No, so
You've
just a
kind of
really quick-
exhausted my knowledge.
A quick, short follow-up, and it can be your opinion only. So the impact is irreversible, and the land will never be what it originally was.
I wish I knew. I've heard people speculate about that, and the way that the solar farm is constructed and utilized is going to determine that. If the prime farmland is being chosen for a very rational reason, and that is the industries wanting to do this want to get a flat area where it's easier to construct, it's easier to angle the panels so they maximize solar exposure. They want to get an area where it's easy to place concrete and poles deep enough to hold these large panels, and fertile prime farmland is that substance that will do it, as opposed to a rocky area or a concrete area or something like that. And they want to be able to have economies of scale, and there's nothing wrong with that. That makes sense. And prime farmland offers that. But once they commit the land to that use, there's an inevitable decline of the fertility of the land due to the loss of agricultural practices that will replenish the land. In addition, you're going to see that it's just, I'm not cynical, but I'm experienced in the surface coal mine operations field. I've had a lot of litigation when I was a practicing attorney involving that, and we just saw, not across the board, most operators were trying to be very responsible, but we had some bad apples who would cut costs, would do midnight discharges from retention ponds, cut corners any way they could, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just don't, I think that it's naive. I think it's overly cynical to expect that, but I think it's naive to ignore that a boardroom has to make profitable decisions. And when that's being done in a boardroom setting or in an office, then you've got to keep your eye on the bottom line. And if there's a lack of enforcement, then, and it's known there's a lack of enforcement, then rules aren't followed. So that concerns me.
Thank you.
Yes?
Anytime you rezone something to industrial, it's not going to ever be the same. You're saying that we shouldn't do that?
I think that we've been wise in the way we've zoned industrial in Boyle County to
Right.
date, and we've looked at the character of areas, and I've traveled recently to, one of our kids lives in South Carolina, and that large metropolitan area has no P&Z, and it makes little sense at times when you see, one land use immediately adjacent to another land use that's completely incompatible, and neither of them are benefiting from it. Out at John Hill Bailey, and I know you're familiar,
Sure.
Very familiar, then those industries work together. We have economic councils and industrial foundation, et cetera. We have infrastructure, long-term planning. When I talk to Josh Morgan or Earl, long-term planning on how to do sewer expansions for like Meggett's new expansion, et cetera. All of that makes sense because our P&Z has designated like uses in similar areas. Conversely, if we have a spot out on Lancaster Road or something where there's a 2,000 acre solar farm and we put that industry right in the middle of that area that doesn't have the transportation corridors or the sewers or anything else to support it, then once that infrastructure is put in that spot, it's going to probably remain an inconsistent and use of that land in the future. Yes. I really appreciate your all's time and patience today. Thank you. We definitely need the alternative energy, and I don't want to do what's it called, NIMBY, not in my backyard. I think that's selfish, and Boyle County is a place where we don't always work together, but we have a lot of well-intentioned people who think hard about things, and we can continue this, and we've got an opportunity right here on this technology to do so. Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts or opinions on the proposed limit of 2,000 acres?
if we're going to embrace the technology, we have to allow the company a large enough amount of land to get the economies of scale to justify it. It's my understanding that anytime you have a new industry or speculation, you don't have certainty in your financial planning. And I think we'd be basically banning, except for all solar, except for private residences, if we don't allow a large enough space for industry to have economies of scale. But I'm not informed enough about that to say what those sizes should be. I don't know. Okay? Thank you. Appreciate you all.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak against the motion to adopt these resolutions? Is there anybody in favor that would like to speak in favor of it? I have one more question for Mark and Henry. If we have a general zoning set aside like these regulations have proposed, and a company comes in and has a problem with some of those regulations, they go to the Board of Adjustments anyway, don't they?
Generally, it would depend on what issue they have. Like, for instance, the cap can't be varied, the 2,000 acre cap. It's really for dimensional regulations, so if they had an issue with setbacks or things like that, they would go to the Board of Adjustment. But we also allow concurrent applications on zone changes, so conditional use permits and variances can be heard by the by Planning Commission as part of a zone change application. So if they were far enough along in their planning and in their general development plan or site plan that they submitted with their application, they could ask you all for that variance or that conditional use permit at that time. So what I'm trying to say is it could end up being you all that make that call, not Board of Adjustment. It would just depend how far along they are in the process.
Does anybody else have any comments? Go ahead.
My name is Frances Halloran. I live at 302 Briarcliff Lane in Danville. My concern is, I don't know how many you all have gone out to see what a solar merchant farm might look like. If you haven't, I suggest that you do. Those of us who have been, prior to the moratorium, members of Smart Growth had gone out and we visited E.W. Brown, and it was very educational. And I would suggest that you all do that prior to passing this zoning. Thank you.
Just for public information, can we have a show of hands on how many people have been to see the E.W. Brown?
Lancaster, what?
And
Yeah.
no,
the one.
Brown is Mercer.
Brown is Mercer
At
County.
the power plant, but
Oh, I've seen the
either
power
one,
plant one.
Mercer or Garrett.
Okay, so 4 out of 6, 5 out of 6 have been to see it.
Okay.
What about the site in Garrett County? How many have been to see it? So that's 5 out of 6 too. All right, any other comments before we close the public hearing?
Well, as a point of clarification, are we just talking about voting on Article 4 at this point? Or is Article 4 and 5?
No, it would be Article 4 and 5 would be the entirety of the merchant electric generating site-specific standards that are only applicable to Boyle County, unincorporated Boyle County.
Okay.
So that's what we're looking at. Most of it, I ran through most of Article 5 last meeting, which is why I didn't go through it again. I think the only additional language I added in Article 5 that I didn't discuss was in D5A, that's where the 2,000 acre cap is discussed. I added a line on the end that there shall be no variance from this. That was something Henry and I talked about. We felt that that was implied, that the Board of Adjustment doesn't have the authority to do that. It would require a zoning ordinance amendment, but I just made it more clear by adding that language in. Everything else remained the same as far as the use table, the setbacks, things of that nature. Really, the big change was just the Article 4, adding the sewer options. I don't know if there's any thought on the conditional use permit request. As far as, right now, we have it being shown as permitted in the industrial zoning district. It can be discussed to make it a conditional use if you all felt so inclined. Like I said, with the zoning map amendment, it's likely that somebody would come in and have to go through a zone change, make it industrial if they're looking out in unincorporated Boyle County for this use. So if they did apply for a conditional use permit, they would likely be applying to you all as a concurrent application as part of their zone change application. It's not guaranteed. If they choose not to do it at that time, they would have to go back to Board of Adjustment later, but they would have that option.
Well, so my understanding is that we've written this as requiring a zone change from ag to industrial and all of the restrictions around that. The alternative to writing it that way, as Mark was discussing, is to propose this as conditional use permit, in which case the land could remain agriculture zoned, but have a conditional use attached to it, and that would be approved by the Board of Adjustments.
Well, I think you could do it either way. I think the way Mark was discussing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mark, but I think you were talking about a conditional use permit in the agricultural zoning district. I'm just making the point that you also have the option to make it a conditional use permit in the industrial zoning district. I just wanted to
Understand.
out there.
Just a clarification. It's my position that we would be better served at this juncture if any solar farm, whether in a current industrial zone or in an agricultural zone, went through the conditional use process, just like the wedding barns did back in the day. As we develop more information, more reliable information, then I think that we could adjust our comp plan, our ordinances, our future land use map, our current land use map to reflect that learning period. But during this learning period, I strongly urge you to have the knowledge that's gathered through a Board of Adjustment hearing and the flexibility to put conditions on that is within the conditional use process, whether it's agricultural or industrial.
If we make a zone change, can't we put conditions on that zone change ourselves?
You can.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I'm like, a conditional use permit does give you more flexibility because it is site-specific, but when you're going through a zone change, you can look at that site.
This is specific too, with the
Yeah.
spot.
Exactly. So I don't know if it gives you any more control over the situation or not, because obviously once everyone's meeting our site-specific standards, when we get to the site plan aspect of it, if they're meeting all our requirements, then we don't really have a great basis to deny it. But with the zone change, you do have some control over, we will be willing to approve it, but you have to meet such and such conditions, which is essentially what a conditional use permit is too. I don't wanna say both are the same function, but in this instance, I don't know if Henry has any comments on that.
I'd love to jump in. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
You're soft, Henry.
You're soft, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll try and speak up a little bit. I wanted to respond to a couple of things where we're talking about zoning and zone map amendments as a function for these farms. Would that create spot zoning? I think that's a question that's specific to the application. We won't know that until the application comes in asking for zoning on a specific parcel. As for zone map amendments being a way to hear these applications, I just want to reassure everyone that I think there's nothing routine about a zone map amendment, that I think that is something with a very high bar for passing that. And I think we could develop information, we could impose conditions for a zone map amendment. Here's what I think would be the difference if we use the conditional use permitting process. First of all, it's the easiest way to limit the use of the site to one specific use. We could have this condition on a zone map amendment that we're making it industrial but for merchant only. I think that's a stronger limitation under a CUP, and I think the law smiles on it a little bit more with the CUP. The next thing is that when you have conditional use permits, if people aren't following the conditions, then the board can call a revocation hearing. That's just, the wheels are greased for doing that kind of thing. And then finally, conditional use permits don't run with the land. They belong to the owner or applicant. So if you have a change in ownership, you have to have a new hearing. So those are the differences I see with the conditional use permit.
And backing up to how the planning commission got involved in writing regulations for the solar farms and merchant electric, the county commissioners asked us to do that, right?
To write this ordinance?
Write regulations and send to them as a recommendation.
Well, we had previously had a hearing on this. My understanding from going back through is that they did not approve our recommendation. I don't know if they took formal action or not, but I believe they did. And then they instituted the moratorium until, I think it's extended until October of this year. So they added 6 months at the end of March, and they have, they wanted a new ordinance brought before them that they could take action on. Not necessarily a new ordinance, but some ordinance that they could take action on. Way that zoning ordinance amendments work is it has to come through planning commission first with a recommendation, and then fiscal court can take action on it. So that's why it's before you all right now.
And I just wanted to add that I think the way we've written this is kind of different than what we heard in the public forums that we had last year in Danville and Boyle. We had 3 open forums to discuss this, and I think the consensus out of those meetings, as we published in the newspaper, was that conditional use process was the best approach for us to be taking right now.
That was the public who suggested that, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
there were 3 public forums. They brought in a variety of experts, held over at CenterWorks, and the results of that published in the paper.
Go ahead.
Can I say something from here?
You at least gotta,
Yeah.
Just in relation to that, Sally Bright, 3456 Lexington Road here in Danville. At the forums too, we had someone come from the Kentucky Resources Council, and they have a model ordinance. I think you guys have seen it. I'm sure some of you have. And in their model ordinance, they use the CUPs. And their setbacks are 100 acres rather than 500. You know, they're just, but it's a model ordinance that a bunch of experts came up with. So that's just something to stick in there. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we changed it to a CUP process, would we still leave the 2,000, would you still leave the 2,000 acre maximum? Or,
That would be up to you all.
okay, that's fine, it's up to us,
You would
It's
have, I
possible.
think you could
It's
still
possible within that
do that.
context.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we're still in public hearing. Does anybody else have another comment for the public hearing? Well, if not, then we'll move back to the regular planning and zoning meeting. And we have a motion before us to either approve or not approve these regulations to go to the county commissioners, as I understand it. So do we have a motion one way or the other to approve or not approve the recommendation?
In discussion, personally, I'd like to see us modify it to be more like the CUP process that. I'm sorry. I'd prefer to see us modify this to be more like the public forum had agreed to and a conditional use permit process as opposed to forcing spot zoning by changing everything to require a zoning change to industrial.
What will be the difference? What will be the difference if we approve a zone change with conditions? What's the difference in that we could do now versus what you're saying?
I think what I understand is then the land would still be zoned ag and not, it
We
could
would
be.
be changing to industrial with conditions.
Well, we could do that.
So
But-
with conditional, with your,
But if we're spot zoning to industrial designation, now we're still have this zone of industrial somewhere out in the county.
so you're saying to leave it agricultural?
Yeah,
Okay.
it could be done as conditional use, that could be done that way.
Yeah. I thought we'd already decided we were making industrial. As a
That-
commission.
That's what we previously approved.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That was a discussion at the time too, that the concrete bases and what you see with gravel under a lot of them, is not a typical agricultural field that somebody's plowing or grazing cattle on. And that's how we got to.
Yeah, but I think
It
the
was much more of an industrial facility.
Understand, but I think the point is the technology is changing. Most today would not pour concrete. They would drive piles to support panels, not, they want to minimize the disruption to the soil because they want to minimize impact to the runoff and the land. That's, ideally, they don't want to have to deal with that, right? That's the minimum cost to a solar installer, I think.
I think, but looking at whether it's industrial or agricultural, you're looking at whether it's an apple or an orange. You know, it's truly industrial. We're generating power.
Right.
That, to me, is not agricultural. So I'd have difficulty calling it agricultural. I mean, just me personally. Now, if you can put conditions on that, leaving it industrial,
Right.
I don't know what the difference is, other than you're leaving it agricultural.
Well, or if we're like Mercer and we're running sheep underneath the solar arrays, is that agriculture or
Sounds
industrial?
like a mixed use to me.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have anybody that'll venture a motion?
No, we need
This
to vent,
ordinance,
Huh? Yeah.
this ordinance. I'll make a motion, we approve it.
Do we have a second?
I'll need you to clarify which option for Article 4.
Article
And then
4.
I don't know if Henry has any additional comments on the motion. I think, based on what you all were saying, it sounded like option one was more preferable, which is just merchant electric generating for the
I'll make
sewer.
a
comes
motion
out.
to adopt this ordinance using option one. Henry, is that sufficient?
Henry, does that sound acceptable as a motion?
I think so. Here's a proposal for a sentence to add on. And I think where we're talking about limiting, where we're permitting an exception from the public sewer, and you could add on to that option this sentence. Any subsequent installation of plumbing shall require connection to public sewer. I think that clears up a detail that may have been previously unanswered. I don't know if you'd be amenable to adding that on to your motion.
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay, and then as far as the sufficiency of the motion, you might add as justifications for your recommendation that this text amendment would protect prime farmland and allow for the regulation of a developing technology.
So added.
Yeah, what you said.
Okay, do we have a second for the motion?
Yeah, I'll second the motion.
Okay. Then comes the critical part, the
Uh,
vote.
See if there's any more discussion.
Yeah, is there any more discussion before we vote? All in favor of the regulation? All right, opposed? Okay. Thank you.
And my opposition would be, I think the process should be different.
Okay, I guess we'll move on to the rest of the agenda.
I can make it easy for you, Chairman. We have no new business.
All right, do we have a motion to adjourn then?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Thank you.